All right, Crim 20. Let's knock out Chapter 11 here, Prison Life for Inmates. The life of a male prisoner. So men and women, as prisoners, they have some interesting differences in the way that they deal with the whole concept of prison life. So first, we're going to start with a total institution. What is a total institution? I like to describe it as their own little island. So everything that you could possibly need is all provided in one facility, one area. They never need to leave the prison. They eat there, they sleep there, they poop there, they go to school there, they do everything there. So unless there are some kind of extenuating circumstances, like maybe someone has a heart attack or something, there's really no reason for anyone to leave a prison. All of their needs are met there in one area, in one place, and they are designed to live there 24/7. So all their daily needs are met. No, okay, blah blah blah. Okay, didn't need to do that. The Inmate Code. The Inmate Code is it's like an unwritten set of rules that inmates live by, which is different than the rules that the regular community live by. Their rules are things like don't snitch, don't be a rat, don't be friends with the cops, as they call them, which is typically correctional officers. Mind your own business. Don't ask questions. So things that are important to inmates might be a little bit different than things that are important to those of us that live on the outside world. And prisonization, another word for prisonization is something called institutionalization. And basically it's when a prisoner adjusts to the prison lifestyle. So, and ultimately we all kind of have to adjust to different things and different periods in our life. And like right now, I'm recording this during the time of the coronavirus quarantine. So we are all adjusting to that lifestyle. Same thing, prisoners, they adjust to the prison lifestyle. They kind of have different names for different types of prisoners. A convict is a person who has been in prison many times, and they typically fare better in prison than they do out of prison. They can live in a prison type environment with little to no problems. Thieves, these are career criminals who are just serving time until they can get their next big score. If you've ever seen the movie Ocean's 11, it's where George Clooney is like he steals millions of dollars from big casinos. And he did his time in custody. He was a thief. He would do his time in, and then when he got out, he was hoping to get his next big score. And then you have your square John. Typically, these are first-time offenders that have not adjusted to the prison lifestyle, and they're still thinking that they're living on the outs. They typically will have a difficult time adjusting to prison. Violence in prison. As you can imagine, there's violence in prison. Sometimes it's one-on-one inmates, sometimes it's groups of inmates, and sometimes it's attacks on staff. Again, probably no big surprise here. There are gangs in prison. There are gangs out of prison as well. There are gangs in prison that run the streets on the outs, and typically the gangs are there for protection. But they are violent, of course. They intimidate others. They sell and control drug sales. They control prostitution. And they gain power and influence by being involved in gangs. And interesting thing, in the prisons, the gangs are broken up pretty strictly down ethnic / racial lines. So if you are an African American, you are typically going to be involved with the African American gangs. If you are Hispanic, you are typically going to be in a Hispanic gang. Whites are typically going to be in white gangs, and Asians typically in Asian gangs in the prison system. They're very, very segregated in prison. If you've ever watched, again, Orange is the New Black was interesting because I think it was true to life in the way they had, you know, the white girls all were together, the black girls were together, the Hispanic girls were together. So anyways, there's a lot of gang activity in gangs in prisons. Gang validation. This is a process by which a law enforcement agency legally deems a person a validated gang member. And there's a few ways you can be identified as a validated gang member. That typically includes things like tattoos, like the clothing you wear. Maybe you've admitted that you're a gang member, your associates, things like that. So once a person is validated as a gang member, legally validated as a gang member, they can be charged with additional crimes. So typically a person has to be a validated gang member before these other crimes can be charged against them. Debrief. Debrief is when an inmate basically decides they want to get out of the gang while they're in prison. And in order to do so, they have to tell the corrections departments everything they know about that gang. Everything they know. Once they debrief, they are obviously enemies of the gang and they need to be housed separately. Probably stuff I might ask you in a quiz. So a study in the 1980s found that 30% of all men in prison participate in homosexual behavior in prison, and less than 1% of them said that they were forced. So that was a study in the 1980s. 30% of all men participated in homosexual behavior in prison. Do they have sexual triangles? Of course they do. Definitely there are fights over who's who's going to participate in which types of behavior on any given day. Are there drugs in prison? Yes. Very unfortunately, yes. My friend Brian, the murderer, Brian, he told me that he had never used heroin ever before he went to prison. And he became a heroin addict in prison. How do they get the drugs into the prisons? Many ways. Visitors, staff, brought in by with food, other supplies. There's a lot of ways that drugs get brought into correctional facilities. And I think more recently we've seen some drones drop drugs out onto a prison yard. Random drug testing does take place at some prisons. Women in prisons. Women are different in prisons, and we're gonna your discussion question this week. I'm gonna have a little video attached to it so you can watch it and comment. But it used to be thought that women didn't belong in prisons; they needed to be in homes. So they were in little cottage-style homes for a while. They were finally in 1861 kept separate from men in prisons. Can you imagine the horror and the abuses that took place when men and women were held in prisons together? But now women are housed in correctional facilities that look just like men's facilities. While they're in these facilities, instead of forming gangs, which they also do, but they oftentimes will form these things called pseudo-families, and you're going to see that in the discussion question video that I post. So be sure to watch the videos. Okay. And that's it.